Good day and God bless you. And welcome to the Bible reading in chronological order. Just such a privilege to have you with us. We thank the Lord for each of you. Thank you for joining us and for participating in this venture with us. I pray that the overview and the reading today would be a blessing to you. Today we're moving on to the sequel of the book of Jeremiah, namely the book of Lamentations. And we're going to be going through chapters 1, 2, and 3, but 3 we're going to cut it off in the middle, so we're going to go from verses 1 to 36, and then we'll continue with the rest of that chapter and 4 and 5 tomorrow. But as we're going through this book, we're going to go through a quick overview and just have a look at the structure of the book, because it's actually quite a phenomenal way that this book is written. Now, we see in the overview that it was written by the prophet Jeremiah in approximately the year 588 BC, and this book is a collection of poems of reflection on the siege and the destruction of Jerusalem by the Babylonian Empire. Now, we must think of this from the point of view of an Israelite during this time. All of the confidence in the blessed promises of the Lord to Israel is lost, as it seems that the Lord has revoked them and broke his covenant with Abraham and Israel and David. No wonder the name of the book is Lamentations. And so the prophet laments the promise of the land of promise being given to Israel, which is now a territory of Babylon. He cries for the promise of the unending line of David's throne, as all he can now see is that it has ended. He weeps because all the nations of the earth cannot be blessed through Israel, and that the Lord of hosts cannot be worshipped in his temple anymore, which was a prophecy that was supposed to be fulfilled. Now, while we think of the lamenting as a negative thing, if we consider again the Psalms of Asaph and the Psalms of Lament, we remember that these are offerings rendered to the Lord. It is not just cries and complaints, but it is an offering to the Lord. And it is not just the voicing of confusion and protest, nor is it just a means to vent, but it is a sacred offering offered to the Lord, which gives clarity and purpose to the suffering of mankind. We can find dignity in our pain through the offering of our sorrow. So let's look at the design of the book now. Now, if we were reading this in the Hebrew, we'll notice that the first 4 chapters are acrostic poems using the Hebrew alphabet. This means that the design of the poem requires the verses to start with the letter of the alphabet in the sequence. Maybe we need some clarity. Let's go through it. In the Hebrew alphabet, there are 22 letters, and so chapters 1 and 2 both have 22 verses each. Verse 1 of the chapters begins with the letter Aleph. Verse 2 begins with the letter Bet, and so on. Chapter 3 is also an acrostic, it's just that it has 66 verses, as it does 3 verses per letter, and then chapter 4 returns to the original design of the acrostic, and then chapter 5 is what they would call a false acrostic, where it also has 22 verses, but each of the verses do not start with the first letter of that alphabet. Now, this can be confusing when we're reading it in the English because we don't see that design. But it is thought that the reason for this very rigid structure is to juxtapose the lack of structure in the land of Judah at this time. Everything was in disarray, and the people of God were adopting pagan beliefs and practices. The temple was used by some kings to house idols. The prophets were persecuted for proclaiming the word of the Lord. Nothing was as it should have been. And so this book, even in its intense lament, shows order and structure and discipline, all the things that Judah lacked in these latter years. Now let's go through the chapters and let's see how this unfolds. When we read chapter 1, we see that this chapter is the cry of the daughter of Zion, which is personified to show the deep loss and tragedy of her fallenness. She has lost her husband, her friends, and has become altogether desolate, living among the heathen. She is in this position because of her own sin, but she raises her voice to the Lord and pleads her cause before him, for his wrath was fierce against her. But she acknowledges her sin and cries out to the Lord and asks him to avenge her. Then we get to chapter 2, and this chapter focuses on the fall of Jerusalem in the light of God's wrath. Now we must remember as we read this passage that although the Lord is slow to anger, he has to be just, as that is his nature, and so a punishment for sin will always be required. And we see that the people all lament for the destruction of the land here. Then we get to chapter 3, and Jeremiah the prophet bewails his own calamities. Now please consider the text in verse 1, because this will then bring light to chapter 2 as well. Verse 1 uses I am in capital letters, which is the name of God. So here the Lord is claiming that he is the man that has seen and tasted of the rod of the Lord. He speaks about the brutal punishment he has to endure, and the beating and the breaking and the isolation and the destruction he goes through, and when he cried, the Lord had forsaken him. Please look at this in relation to Isaiah chapter 53, because when you look at it in parallel, you'll see how this is actually talking about the Lord, except that it does say the breaking of the bones, but we know that the Lord's bones were not broken. So that's the only thing that is of contention there, but I'm just bringing that to light. But you can see that it's using the name I am, and so it is referring to the Lord that has taken on this punishment, this beating. But then verse 21 is very strange in that it reads, "This I recall to my mind, therefore have I hope." How can you have hope when you're reading about this utter desolation and destruction of the body? It is because the only hope that we have at all is in the sacrifice of our Lord Jesus. And when we think on his payment of sin for us, we can have hope. Verses 22 and 23 read, "It is of the Lord's mercies that we are not consumed, because his compassions fail not. They are new every morning. Great is thy faithfulness." We see how Jeremiah magnifies the Lord in humility and tells of the compassion and mercy of the Lord towards those he loves and chastens. And that is a beautiful thing. That is so wonderful that the Lord has taken upon himself the punishment of sin. The payment of sin had to be paid, but it is the Lord that paid it. And he has done this compassionately, mercifully to usward. This is where we're going to leave it for today. I pray that the Lord will bless you and keep you. May his face shine upon you. May he give you peace. God bless you as you enjoy the reading of the word today.
The Lamentations of Jeremiah, chapter 1. How doth the city sit solitary that was full of people? How is she become as a widow? She that was great among the nations and princess among the provinces, how is she become tributary? She weepeth sore in the night, and her tears are on her cheeks. Among all her lovers she hath none to comfort her. All her friends have dealt treacherously with her. They are become her enemies. Judah is gone into captivity because of affliction and because of great servitude. She dwelleth among the heathen. She findeth no rest. All her persecutors overtook her between the straits. The ways of Zion do mourn, because none come to the solemn feasts. All her gates are desolate. Her priests sigh, her virgins are afflicted, and she is in bitterness. Her adversaries are the chief, her enemies prosper. For the Lord hath afflicted her for the multitude of her transgressions. Her children are gone into captivity before the enemy. And from the daughter of Zion all her beauty is departed. Her princes are become like harts that find no pasture, and they are gone without strength before the pursuer. Jerusalem remembered in the days of her affliction and of her miseries all her pleasant things that she had in the days of old, when her people fell into the hand of the enemy, and none did help her. The adversaries saw her and did mock at her Sabbaths. Jerusalem hath grievously sinned, therefore she is removed. All that honored her despise her, because they have seen her nakedness. Yea, she sigheth and turneth backward. Her filthiness is in her skirts. She remembereth not her last end. Therefore she came down wonderfully. She had no comforter. O Lord, behold my affliction, for the enemy hath magnified himself. The adversary hath spread out his hand upon all her pleasant things. For she hath seen that the heathen entered into her sanctuary, whom thou didst command that they should not enter into thy congregation. All her people sigh, they seek bread. They have given their pleasant things for meat to relieve the soul. See, O Lord, and consider, for I am become vile. Is it nothing to you, all ye that pass by? Behold, and see if there be any sorrow like unto my sorrow, which is done unto me, wherewith the Lord hath afflicted me in the day of his fierce anger. From above hath he sent fire into my bones, and it prevaileth against them. He hath spread a net for my feet. He hath turned me back. He hath made me desolate and faint all the day. The yoke of my transgressions is bound by his hand. They are wreathed and come up upon my neck. He hath made my strength to fall. The Lord hath delivered me into their hands, from whom I am not able to rise up. The Lord hath trodden under foot all my mighty men in the midst of me. He hath called an assembly against me to crush my young men. The Lord hath trodden the virgin, the daughter of Judah, as in a winepress. For these things I weep. Mine eye runneth down with water, because the comforter that should relieve my soul is far from me. My children are desolate, because the enemy prevailed. Zion spreadeth forth her hands, and there is none to comfort her. The Lord hath commanded concerning Jacob that his adversaries should be round about him. Jerusalem is as a menstruous woman among them. The Lord is righteous, for I have rebelled against his commandment. Hear, I pray you, all people, and behold my sorrow. My virgins and my young men are gone into captivity. I called for my lovers, but they deceived me. My priests and mine elders gave up the ghost in the city, while they sought their meat to relieve their souls. Behold, O Lord, for I am in distress. My bowels are troubled, mine heart is turned within me, for I have grievously rebelled. Abroad the sword bereaveth, at home there is as death. They have heard that I sigh, there is none to comfort me. All mine enemies have heard of my trouble, they are glad that thou hast done it. Thou wilt bring the day that thou hast called, and they shall be like unto me. Let all their wickedness come before thee, and do unto them as thou hast done unto me for all my transgressions. For my sighs are many, and my heart is faint. Chapter 2. How hath the Lord covered the daughter of Zion with a cloud in his anger, and cast down from heaven unto the earth the beauty of Israel, and remembered not his footstool in the day of his anger. The Lord hath swallowed up all the habitations of Jacob, and hath not pitied. He hath thrown down in his wrath the strongholds of the daughter of Judah. He hath brought them down to the ground. He hath polluted the kingdom and the princes thereof. He hath cut off in his fierce anger all the horn of Israel. He hath drawn back his right hand from before the enemy, and he burned against Jacob like a flaming fire, which devoureth round about. He hath bent his bow like an enemy. He stood with his right hand as an adversary, and slew all that were pleasant to the eye in the tabernacle of the daughter of Zion. He poured out his fury like fire. The Lord was as an enemy. He hath swallowed up Israel. He hath swallowed up all her palaces. He hath destroyed his strongholds, and hath increased in the daughter of Judah mourning and lamentation. And he hath violently taken away his tabernacle as if it were of a garden. He hath destroyed his places of the assembly. The Lord hath caused the solemn feasts and Sabbaths to be forgotten in Zion, and hath despised in the indignation of his anger the king and the priest. The Lord hath cast off his altar. He hath abhorred his sanctuary. He hath given up into the hand of the enemy the walls of her palaces. They have made a noise in the house of the Lord, as in the day of a solemn feast. The Lord hath purposed to destroy the wall of the daughter of Zion. He hath stretched out a line. He hath not withdrawn his hand from destroying. Therefore he made the rampart and the wall to lament. They languish together. Her gates are sunk into the ground. He hath destroyed and broken her bars. Her king and her princes are among the Gentiles. The law is no more. Her prophets also find no vision from the Lord. The elders of the daughter of Zion sit upon the ground and keep silence. They have cast up dust upon their heads. They have girded themselves with sackcloth. The virgins of Jerusalem hang down their heads to the ground. Mine eyes do fail with tears. My bowels are troubled. My liver is poured upon the earth for the destruction of the daughter of my people, because the children and the sucklings swoon in the streets of the city. They say to their mothers, "Where is corn and wine?" When they swooned as the wounded in the streets of the city, when their soul was poured out into their mother's bosom. What thing shall I take to witness for thee? What thing shall I liken to thee, O daughter of Jerusalem? What shall I equal to thee, that I may comfort thee, O virgin daughter of Zion? For thy breach is great like the sea. Who can heal thee? Thy prophets have seen vain and foolish things for thee, and they have not discovered thine iniquity, to turn away thy captivity, but have seen for thee false burdens and causes of banishment. All that pass by clap their hands at thee. They hiss and wag their head at the daughter of Jerusalem, saying, "Is this the city that men call the perfection of beauty, the joy of the whole earth?" All thine enemies have opened their mouth against thee. They hiss and gnash the teeth. They say, "We have swallowed her up. Certainly this is the day that we looked for. We have found, we have seen it." The Lord hath done that which he had devised. He hath fulfilled his word that he had commanded in the days of old. He hath thrown down and hath not pitied, and he hath caused thine enemy to rejoice over thee. He hath set up the horn of thine adversaries. Their heart cried unto the Lord, "O wall of the daughter of Zion, let tears run down like a river day and night. Give thyself no rest. Let not the apple of thine eye cease. Arise, cry out in the night. In the beginning of the watches, pour out thine heart like water before the face of the Lord. Lift up thy hands toward him for the life of thy young children that faint for hunger in the top of every street. Behold, O Lord, and consider to whom thou hast done this. Shall the women eat their fruit, and children of a span long? Shall the priest and the prophet be slain in the sanctuary of the Lord? The young and the old lie on the ground in the streets. My virgins and my young men are fallen by the sword. Thou hast slain them in the day of thine anger. Thou hast killed and not pitied. Thou hast called, as in a solemn day, my terrors round about, so that in the day of the Lord's anger none escaped nor remained. Those that I have swaddled and brought up hath mine enemy consumed. Chapter 3. I am the man that hath seen affliction by the rod of his wrath. He hath led me and brought me into darkness, but not into light. Surely against me is he turned. He turneth his hand against me all the day. My flesh and my skin hath he made old. He hath broken my bones. He hath builded against me, and compassed me with gall and travail. He hath set me in dark places, as they that be dead of old. He hath hedged me about that I cannot get out. He hath made my chain heavy. Also when I cry and shout, he shutteth out my prayer. He hath enclosed my ways with hewn stone. He hath made my paths crooked. He was unto me as a bear lying in wait, and as a lion in secret places. He hath turned aside my ways and pulled me in pieces. He hath made me desolate. He hath bent his bow and set me as a mark for the arrow. He hath caused the arrows of his quiver to enter into my reins. I was a derision to all my people, and their song all the day. He hath filled me with bitterness. He hath made me drunken with wormwood. He hath also broken my teeth with gravel stones. He hath covered me with ashes. And thou hast removed my soul far off from peace. I forgat prosperity. And I said, my strength and my hope is perished from the Lord. Remembering mine affliction and my misery, the wormwood and the gall. My soul hath them still in remembrance, and is humbled in me. This I recall to my mind, therefore have I hope. It is of the Lord's mercies that we are not consumed, because his compassions fail not. They are new every morning. Great is thy faithfulness. The Lord is my portion, saith my soul, therefore will I hope in him. The Lord is good unto them that wait for him, to the soul that seeketh him. It is good that a man should both hope and quietly wait for the salvation of the Lord. It is good for a man that he bear the yoke in his youth. He sitteth alone and keepeth silence, because he hath borne it upon him. He putteth his mouth in the dust, if so be there may be hope. He giveth his cheek to him that smiteth him. He is filled full with reproach. For the Lord will not cast off forever. But though he cause grief, yet will he have compassion according to the multitude of his mercies. For he doth not afflict willingly, nor grieve the children of men. To crush under his feet all the prisoners of the earth, to turn aside the right of a man before the face of the Most High, to subvert a man in his cause, the Lord approveth not.